The morning mist still clung to the valley floor of Sanctuary Station Veyrath 7 when Mara Ellison stepped out of the caretaker's quarters, her breath visible in the cold air, her worn leather work gloves dangling from the pocket of her jacket. She had been assigned to the Vrethkai Predator Cub Rehabilitation Unit for 3 standard years now. 3 years of sharp teeth testing the durability of her equipment. 3 years of claws that could slice durasteel wire, leaving only shallow scratches on her reinforced sleeves. 3 years of creatures that, fully grown, could take down a 6-legged mega bison in under 40 seconds, currently wrestling each other for scraps of nutrient paste and generally causing chaos every waking moment of their lives. Mara loved every single one of them. She rounded the corner of the enclosure toward the morning feeding station, tapping the datapad against her palm to check vitals. 14 cubs. Ages ranging from 4 months to 14 months. All healthy. All growing at acceptable rates. All, according to the overnight logs, sleeping peacefully. She looked up from the datapad. 14 pairs of luminous amber eyes stared back at her through the mesh. They were very much not sleeping. At the center of the group, sitting with the particular stillness of a creature pretending it had not just done something, sat Kale Vera. He was the largest of the 14, 10 months old, with the distinctive rust and silver striped fur of the Highland Vrethkai subspecies, and eyes that were just slightly too intelligent for Mara's comfort some mornings. He had been given the name by the research team after demonstrating, at 6 months old, the ability to observe how Mara unlatched a feeding gate and replicate the motion with his own paw 3 days later. They had needed to redesign the latch after that. In his mouth, held very gently between his front teeth, because Vrethkai predators learn jaw pressure control with striking precision from a young age, were Mara's work gloves. Both of them. She had no memory of dropping them. "Kale," she said. He blinked once. Slow. Deliberate. "Those are mine." He shifted his weight, almost imperceptibly, backward. Around him, the other 13 cubs were watching with the intense focus of an audience that understood something was about to happen, even if they weren't sure what. Little Sarah, the youngest of the group, had climbed halfway up the mesh wall for a better vantage point. Tolek and Pri, the inseparable pair of 6-month twins, had their heads tilted in perfect synchronization, ears forward. Mara looked at the gloves. She looked at Kale. She looked at the 13 witnesses. She made a decision. She lowered herself into a half-crouch. Kale's ears went flat. "I'm going to count to 3, Mara said, very quietly, in the low, slow voice she used when she wanted to be taken seriously. "And then I am going to get those gloves back." A Vrethkai cub's social brain, according to every xenobiological study in the station's database, was extraordinarily calibrated to hierarchy, chase play, and the reading of intent signals from larger predators. They understood threat postures. They understood the difference between a predator that was going to attack and a predator that was inviting a chase. They were, in short, very good at reading body language. Kale Vera, at 10 months old, stared at Mara Ellison for approximately 1.4 seconds. And then he bolted. Mara erupted into a full sprint. The enclosure was large, it had to be, for 14 growing predator cubs to have adequate territory, but Mara had been running these paths for 3 years and she knew every rock, every dip, every drainage channel. She was not particularly fast by human athletic standards. She was not strong enough to physically restrain an adult Vrethkai. She was, by every measurable metric, the least dangerous creature in this enclosure. Kale did not seem to know that. He ran like she was something to be feared. He ran like she was a storm behind him. He cut left around the feeding station and Mara cut the angle, gaining 2 meters. He reversed direction so suddenly that 3 of his packmates scattered out of his path, and Mara skidded on gravel and found her footing and kept going. She was yelling, not words, just sound, the kind of chase yell that children use in games and that apparently transcended species boundaries because every single cub in the enclosure had gone electric with excitement, some running parallel to Kale, some running in random panicked directions, Sarah dropping from the mesh wall and immediately sprinting in a circle for no discernible reason. Kale made it to the far end of the enclosure and turned around. He and Mara were 10 meters apart. Both of them were breathing hard. The gloves were still in his mouth, held with extraordinary care. Mara pointed at him. He took one step backward. She took one step forward. He bolted again. This went on for 4 minutes and 37 seconds, which Mara knew because the enclosure's security system logged all unusual activity, and she would later review the footage approximately 11 times over the following week, sometimes showing it to colleagues from other units, always with the same quiet, helpless smile. It ended when Kale, misjudging a turn at speed, skidded directly into the soft mud around the water trough and went sprawling, all 4 legs out, the gloves flying from his mouth in a graceful arc. Mara walked over. She picked up her gloves. She looked down at Kale, who was lying in the mud with the expression of a creature recalculating several things simultaneously. She crouched down next to him, close enough that this would have been extraordinarily inadvisable with any wild or adult Vrethkai, and she said, "Good run." Kale's ears, which had been flat against his skull, rose by approximately 30 degrees. She reached out and scratched the spot just behind his left ear that he'd started leaning into 3 months ago when he thought no one was watching. He closed his eyes. His chest made the low, rolling sound that the xenobiologists called prepper behavior and that Mara called exactly what it was. She sat down in the mud next to him. Around them, the other 13 cubs were slowly, cautiously, gravitating inward, Sarah arriving first and immediately flopping across Mara's legs with the confidence of a cub who had long since claimed her as territory. Tolek and Pri settled on either side, pressing their warm flanks against her. The others arranged themselves in a loose ring, the kind of cluster-est behavior the field manuals described as a trust display, the kind that only happened within established family units. Mara pulled on her gloves, slightly damp, somewhat chewed at the cuff, and sat in the mud in the center of 14 apex predator cubs while the morning mist finished burning off the valley and the station's second sun crested the ridge. She had a report to file. She had nutrient paste ratios to recalculate. She had a mesh panel on the north side of the enclosure that needed patching after Kale had tested it last Thursday. She stayed where she was for another 40 minutes. When the senior xenobiologist, Dr. Reno Kalast, reviewed the security footage that evening and called her into his office to ask what exactly she thought she had been doing, Mara considered her answer for a long moment. "Building trust," she said. Dr. Kalast looked at the footage of her sprinting through an enclosure full of predator cubs, yelling, while a 10-month-old apex predator ran from her like she was the most terrifying thing he'd ever seen. "With the cubs," he said. "With Kale specifically," she said. "He needed to know I could keep up." There was a silence. "Did he steal your gloves again this morning?" "He did not," Mara said. Which was true. He had stolen her datapad stylus instead, but that felt like a separate conversation for a separate day. Dr. Kalast looked at the footage one more time, at the moment near the end, the wide aerial view from the overhead camera, 14 silver and rust bodies arranged around one small human woman in the mud, everyone still, everyone warm, the valley quiet around them. "Keep up the good work," he said. Mara smiled. Outside, in the enclosure, Kale Vera was sitting in the spot where she'd been that morning, nose to the ground, smelling where she had sat. Learning her. Deciding she was worth following. Mara walked back out to start the afternoon feeding. He was at the mesh before she reached the gate. Humanity, it turns out, doesn't always conquer the galaxy by being the strongest. Sometimes we just run fast enough that something worth knowing thinks we're worth chasing back.